So we're gonna learn about Behat here. I wanted to give this session because I've had a lot of conversations with talented developers who assumed that there was kind of a complicated ramp up process with Behat and haven't done it. We're all very busy, and we're busy on client projects, and it's hard to justify hey, let me learn on your project. So let's learn about it right now. First, who am I? I'm Peter Sieg. I'm the engineer at 4 Kitchens. All my accounts are chasing Maxwell. So GitHub, Drupal, Twitter. That's where you can reach me. So what are we going to do? First, we're going to do a high-level overview of Behat. I'm not going to get into the details because the main thing that I want to do is to get you all what you need to get up and running with Behat. So I'll go over concepts and make sure that we understand all of that, but I want to get into the nitty-gritty and get you all running. So that's the second thing we're going to do. We're going to start using Behat in a real Drupal site. I'm using Drupal 7 because I think that's probably what most of you are using right now, and so it'll be valuable, hopefully. To facilitate that, if any of you have a functioning Drupal site on your local environment, on your computer, or if you have access to one on a server somewhere, you can actually follow along with me in the slides. I'm using a technology called ShowTerm that recorded my terminal and put it up there. So we're going to watch me in the past setting up Behat, and I'll talk about it, and you can follow those steps and copy and paste and everything.
Can we follow along in a
I can't guarantee that it'll work in this way, but it probably will. And then there's a boilerplate too, right here where you can see the finished product in a Drupal sentence. All right, and of course you need PHP 5.3.5 plus with those libraries. Originally, I conceived of this as a training, and so I'm not going to be able to help you guys get that set up during the presentation, obviously, but if you have any questions afterwards, I'm happy to help with that. And we're reaching the limitations of the remote clicker. So I'm going to do the rest of the presentation in the back of the room, but you guys don't need to see me anyway. Okay, so what is Behat, first of all? It is not a Behat. Okay, so on Behat's documentation page, it says Behat is an open source behavior-driven development framework for PHP 5.3 plus. What's behavior-driven development, you ask? It's a way to develop software through a consistent communication or a constant communication with stakeholders in form of examples of how the software should help them and you to achieve your goals. So I think that that's a great description of what behavior-driven development is, but if I didn't know what Behat was and read that, I'd still be left wondering what Behat actually is. So in other words, Behat is a testing framework that uses plain language to test user behavior on your site. So what happens if you don't use Behat? And I'm sure you guys will be able to relate to this. So this one I think people often overlook, but Behat actually helps you understand. Writing Behat tests helps you understand features better so that you can develop it better. And if you don't do that, it leads to inadequate development of features. Of course, features built with bugs baked in because you didn't realize that those bugs were there when you shipped it. Stakeholders keep reporting functional regressions. That's the worst one. You've shipped to production, and they catch something you didn't catch, and it's horrible. And because of that, stakeholders have no confidence in you or your work. That's no fun either. So, developing with tests. How can Behat help me? It helps you. These are kind of like the reverse of what we just went through. It helps you discover stakeholder goals and functional requirements. It helps you improve the quality of your application as you're writing it. It helps you increase the stability of your application so that you don't introduce functional regressions later after shipping, and it gives stakeholders confidence. So it's great. So let's dive in. So here's an example. I'm just going to go over like really high level what you're looking at here, and then we'll jump into actually getting set up. So there's some terms that I'm going to go over. What you're looking at right now is a feature file. And so a feature contains a description of what that feature does. If you all are familiar with Scrum development workflow, those 3 lines underneath where it says feature, that's basically a user story. And then you have a collection of scenarios, and under those scenarios you have steps to reproduce that scenario. So I've kind of already talked about this stuff, but scenario is those 2 things that you see under feature. Obviously it says scenario, and they contain a description of the scenario and then steps to complete that scenario. And then you have steps. And I've thought about this in terms of like which of these things is magic and which is not magic. And that's been helpful for me to know like what actually causes things to happen and what doesn't. So the feature description and the user story, that doesn't do anything. That's not magic. The scenario description, that's not magic either. The magic comes in with the steps. Those actually cause real behavior to be reproduced on your site. And steps start with keywords. You're seeing that with given, then, and when. And so that helps group your steps into preconditions, setting up preconditions on your site, performing actions on your site, that's when. And of course, the preconditions were given. And then making assertions about the resulting state on your site, and that's then. And then tag is what you see up at the top where it says @API. And that is does what you would imagine with a name like tag, that categorizes your features and scenarios. And it can be applied to both at the feature level and at the scenario level. And then you're not seeing this here in this example, but I want to explain what it is anyway while we're talking about terms. Context is a class, a PHP class that provides new ways of interacting with your application through these steps. So these steps are following patterns that these context classes provide that you can then use in your feature files to actually perform these tests. And then an extension is a PHP class that alters or adds functionality to Behat. And often the way that looks is providing new contexts or integrating with other technologies like Drupal. So you have like the Drupal extension, which we're going to be looking at in a little bit. And of course, it feels like magic at this point. Like you're seeing the English language here, and somehow that's going to translate into like stuff happening on your site. So how do we get started? Let's do it together right now. This is my favorite Jurassic Park quote. All right, so here's where we get into the real meat. So if you're following along, you can copy paste from this here, but so fire up the slides and your terminal and copy paste. The first thing that we're doing is really an optional step. I'm following the documentation for the Drupal extension. I'm going to pause this while I'm talking so that it doesn't get ahead of me. In that documentation, kind of the path of least resistance, if you are not familiar with Composer, is just to install it locally on your site. Well, not on your site, but in your code base. So that's that curl command that you see there. That's really small. Yeah. I don't know if I can make it bigger within my slides. Oh, that kind of worked. A little bit better. All right. Well, I definitely recommend pulling it up on your laptop. So, again, first thing that we're doing is installing Composer, because that's how we're going to install Behat. And so Composer uses a composer.json file to install your dependencies. And so here we're configuring it to require the Drupal extension. And the Drupal extension is going to require Behat and all the other dependencies that you need to integrate Behat with Drupal. And then we're just going to install Behat by running Composer install. And I'll fast forward this. There's all the dependencies being installed, and we're done. So the next step is we need to configure Behat. Again, all this stuff is derived from the Drupal extension documentation. So we're going to create a behat.yaml file. Default up at the top, that's the profile name. You can create multiple profiles. For the purpose of what we're doing here, we're just going to have one. Then you see suites and the default suite. Again, you can have multiple suites. We're just going to do one. And then you set up the context that you want to use. Feature context is what is going to be set up automatically for you to be able to add your own custom steps. So we'll look at that a little bit later. The Drupal context, as you imagine, provides steps that are specific to Drupal. I'm going to fast forward this so that I can not wait for myself in the past to type. And then we have message context, make context, drush context. All of those are providing steps, step patterns that we can follow. And I'll show you how you can see what all those patterns are here in a second. Next thing that we're going to do is configure our extensions. So we have the Mink extension. We're enabling the Gout and Selenium drivers. And we're setting the base URL. I had on my local site, had that set up to behat-training.local. And then we configured the Drupal extension, and we're configuring it just to enable the black box driver at this point. That's kind of unauthenticated kind of steps that you can run on Drupal. All right. And then we run the command. So the Behat executable, when you installed it with Composer, is inside the directories vendor and then bin. And so you run Behat init, and that's going to do some fun stuff that we're going to look at in the next slide. So this is verifying that everything worked correctly. We should have Behat installed on our local environment now. And so let's look at the feature context file that Behat init was supposed to create for us. So I'm just going to pause it here so I can talk about what's going on. Okay, so we're using these different contexts, and we're extending raw Drupal context. I found that it's super helpful to also extend the Drupal context because it does things like keep track of nodes that you created and get rid of them, and so you can kind of follow that same pattern. But here, what's set up for you by default is the raw Drupal context, and it's implementing snippet accepting context, which is kind of like a hook. Says this is a context, and it's going to have steps in it. All right. Okay, so here's where we look at what the actual step patterns are that we can use. So I'm running behat-dl, and then I'm piping it through less because it's easier that way. So you can see here there's tons of stuff that you get out of the box. And you can see that it follows the patterns that we saw in the example. You have given, then, and when as keywords that you can use. And then you have a pattern that you can follow. Where you see, there's some kind of complicated patterns. I'm just going to talk about the more simple ones. Where you see a colon in front of a word, that's a placeholder. You can put whatever you want in there. So you can see at the top where it says, given I am logged in as a user with the roles, and the parentheses means the S can be there or not in the pattern. You can put your own role in there. So you could say, given I am logged in as a user with the administrator role. So there's all kinds of things that you can do out of the box. It's very cool and covers a lot of functionality. I won't go over all of it because that would take a long time. But there's a lot here, and if you run that command on your own environment, you'll see you'll be able to look at those steps and see what you're able to do. All right. So because that command worked and we have a feature context file, we know that the installation worked. And we have Behat installed now. So let's write a test. That was easy, huh? We have Behat installed. Not a big deal at all. So we're going to create a new feature file. And all the tests that I've created are super simple, probably not helpful for you on your Drupal site, but they're easy to understand, and so seemed like the right thing to do. So the site should be available. This is super simple. Like it's being served, and you can access it at the URL that we put in the configuration. So we have the description and the user story, and now we're going to create the scenario. A user views the home page. And let's fast forward. Okay, so given I am an anonymous user, when I go to the home page, then I should be on the home page. Really exciting, huh? So we wrote that feature. Let's see if we can successfully run a Behat test. So let's actually play it. Oh, that was fast. So you run Behat, and it runs through that test. The green letters there means it worked, and of course it shows you how many scenarios and steps passed down at the bottom. And if there were to be a step that failed, of course, sometimes you have lots and lots and lots of features, and sometimes it goes out of the bash history, and you can't scroll up to see what failed. It will summarize at the bottom. Here are the features and steps that failed, and even line numbers and everything, so you can go back and check it out. So let's write another test. We're going to get a little bit more complicated. We're going to test node edit permissions. Again, probably on your own projects, this is not a super high priority thing to test, but we all understand what's happening here. So the first thing that we need to do is we need to add an API driver, because Blackbox, as I mentioned before, only handles things that you can do on your site as an anonymous user. So here we're configuring the Drupal driver. I was in the Drush session earlier today and learned something new that's really exciting. I always use the Drupal driver, which you can only it only works on a locally installed copy of Drupal. And now apparently you can use the Drush driver, which can operate on remote Drupal sites to do some of the same things. So the Drush driver previously couldn't do things like node creation and user creation, and apparently there's a PR that makes it so that now it can. I guess it's not merged yet, but it's coming, and that's really exciting. So right now I'm using the Drupal driver. In the future, you'll probably want to use the Drush driver. And the Drupal root there is just the path to where my site is located locally on my machine, and that part is necessary so that Drupal can talk to your site and make things happen. Okay, so now we're gonna now that we have the driver set up the way that we need it, we're going to create the feature file. Called it edit perms feature, and I'm just going to fast forward. Too far. Okay, so the thing that's different about this from the previous feature that we created, other than just being longer and having more steps, we specified the API tag. So earlier I talked about tags as just providing categorization for your features and scenarios, and that's cool because you can do things like only includes features or scenarios with a certain tag, or even exclude them when you run Behat. But another thing that it does, extensions can use those tags to do whatever the heck they want. And in this case, the Drupal extension is using this tag to flag that, oh, we need to use the API driver for this feature. So here we're testing that content can be created and edited, and that the users with the correct roles can do those things. So the first scenario, an administrator can edit an article, and given I am logged in as an administrator, then I should be able to edit an article. Pretty simple, huh? Then to test that users who are merely authenticated and don't have the administrator role cannot do that. I say, given I'm logged in
as a user with the authenticated role, when I go to this URL, then the response status code should be 403. And I've set this up so that if you like just install Drupal, don't change anything, all of these features should pass on your site. So if you're doing that now on a fresh Drupal site, or you want to play with that later, you can do that. And so then I'm just doing the exact same thing with the default basic page content type that comes with Drupal. And also you'll notice that placeholders in steps, if they don't contain a space, you can just put it right in. Like this is a placeholder right here. It's the label for that content type. But if it contains a space, like basic page, you need to specify, or you need to surround it in quotes. All right, let's see if it works. You see it's taking a little bit longer because it's actually having to like create users and stuff on the site. Yay! 5 scenarios passed, 13 steps, success. All right. So that's like basic, like out of the box, we were able to do those things. We didn't have to do anything fancy. Like literally, as you've seen, like you could get set up doing this stuff in like 15 minutes. But what if that's not enough? And I found that as I was writing features for clients that pretty quickly I hit the wall of like, okay, what's out of the box is not enough if you're doing things with like custom entities or something like that. So let's look at what you do if that's not enough. And luckily, the numbers all go to 11. So we can do this. If you need a feature that's not covered by the out-of-the-box steps, then you can create your own step in the feature context file. And of course, that's just a class that extends and implements the right things. Like you don't have to use the feature context file. That's just what is provided for you out of the box. There's a lot going on here. I didn't like write it out as I was recording because we would have been here for forever. But I'm going to explain what's going on here. So what we're testing now, which you can't do out of the box because it involves configuration variables, is whether or not maintenance mode works on the Drupal site. Again, this is probably not a test that you would need to run on your own Drupal site, but maybe you do want to. And maybe you want to do something similar that requires changing configuration variables. And one thing that's really important when you're testing your application is that when you're doing like real things with your application, after you do those things, you need to set it back. Like if you create nodes or users, those nodes and users need to be deleted when you're done. Same thing with configuration variables. If you put your site into maintenance mode, it needs to be back out of maintenance mode when you're done with your test. And so that's what we're going to be doing here. So we're setting up a changed variables array, which is going to track our changed variables, as you might imagine. And then here are 2 steps. So this is where the magic happens. The pattern is defined in the comment, the function comment, and it starts with an @ symbol and then the keyword, and then the pattern comes after that. I'm not using any placeholders or anything here because the steps were pretty simple. Just the site is or is not in maintenance mode. But yeah, so let's look at what they're doing. So they are getting the current state of the maintenance mode configuration variable. If we're trying to say that the site is in maintenance mode and it wasn't, so that variable was false, then we are going to set it to true, and then we're going to, I'll show you this function here in a second, track changed variable, but we're going to set the original value of that variable to, this function is going to alter that array that we saw at the beginning to keep track of changed variables. And then the same thing, just the reverse, is happening with this step provider here, just the opposite. So let's look at tracked change variables. So that's just going to check like, does this thing already exist in the changed variables? Because if it does, then we already know the original value. We don't want to overwrite that with something else that may not be the original value. And then we're going to, if it didn't already exist, we're going to add it to the changed variables array. Super simple. And then this is another cool magic thing. You can use this tag in your function comment inside a context class to make something run at the end of a scenario. And there's lots of other tags that you can use that do other cool things, but this is the only one we're going to talk about today. So at the end of every single scenario that you saw in those feature files, this function is going to run, which checks to see if we have anything stored in the changed variables array, and if it's set, so if there's an actual value, it wasn't null, then it sets it back to whatever the value was. If it was null, then it deletes the variable because it didn't exist when we started this test. So a little bit more complicated, but still like pretty simple. But we've just added our own custom steps. So if we were to run that -dl Behat command again, we would see our new steps that we added. Now we're going to create the feature that uses those steps. Fast forward. Show term is really awesome, but I'm finding that it needs like bookmark functionality or something. Okay, so here we're using our custom steps. Again, we're using the API driver because we're going to log in as an authenticated user, and you can't do that without the API driver. So here's our steps. Given I am an anonymous user and the site is not in maintenance mode, and I should mention, I forgot this earlier, you can use the keywords and but to just extend the keyword that came before it. So where you see and underneath the given there, those are all interpreted as givens. And that's important just to make it readable. One of the really cool things about Behat is you can show this to a stakeholder and they like understand what's going on, and it's kind of cool to see. And if they're kind of savvy, they could even write these tests. So given I'm an anonymous user and the site is not in maintenance mode, and I am viewing an article with the title Test Normal Mode, then I should see the heading, Test Normal Mode. That means like we saw the page, the node was there. Given the site is in maintenance mode, and I am viewing an article with the title Test Maintenance Mode, then I should not see the heading Test Maintenance Mode. So pretty straightforward. Let's see if it works. And of course I know that it works because I recorded this. Sorry. All right, there we go. And of course, like I mentioned before, you can specify tags that you want to run, so we could only run the API features. You can also just put the path to a feature file at the end of the Behat executable to say, just run this feature without tags. Yeah?
Is there a way to zoom in?
I don't think that I can zoom in any further, unfortunately. I'm sorry. Oh, yes, I can.
Yeah.
There we go.
That's better.
Sorry, I went so long without doing that.
Can you put more than one tag?
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, man, now it's not working. I wanted to zoom in even further. Is that okay? Okay. All right, so it all passed. We wrote our own custom steps and handled setting the state back in our Drupal site, and everything worked. It was great. Now, what happens when like you need to write tests for your tests because things aren't working in Behat and you're banging your head against a wall? So there's some really useful debugging functionality that comes out of the box with the Drupal extension in Behat. So there's one configuration that we need to add for one specific debugging step that we can use, and that's show command. So there's a step that lets you show the last response in a real browser, and I'm setting that to use Firefox to open up the last page that was viewed. So that's one of the things you can do. There's a few others that I'm going to show. So I'm going to edit this really simple feature that we have and add some of the debugging steps that you can use. These are like essential. So the one that I've used a lot is then I break. And what that allows you to do is it just pauses the execution of the test. So instead of, let me pause this. There we go. So instead of having all the state set back after the test and you have no idea why it failed because all the users and nodes were deleted, you can break at that point and go into your Drupal site and play around and see why something was failing if you don't understand. So that's really useful. Then underneath the then I should be on the home page, I added then print last response. What that does is just takes the entire DOM of the last request and just prints it out to the terminal. So maybe if you need to like search it for some string or something, that might be useful. And then you can also do then show last response, and that's where you can actually open it up in a browser and see it there. So let's see it in action. Unfortunately, you're not going to be able to see Firefox open, and show term kind of wigged out here, but it says press any key to continue there. And so it stopped until you press a key, and then it goes. Then you see that that was the DOM printed to the terminal, and here are, this is when Firefox was firing up. But I'm actually going to show this working because it's kind of cool. And then all our tests passed because we did it all right. So I think that I'm actually not even close to being out of time. Wow. Okay. Well, other things that I didn't think we were going to have time to talk about. What wasn't covered is testing JavaScript interaction in the browser. So there's some things that you need to actually use a technology like Selenium or Phantom.js to be able to test user interaction with the site. So we did, if you remember in the configuration file, enable the Selenium driver, but we didn't install the Selenium server. I can't demo that right now, unfortunately. And then what's really cool is using continuous integration services to automate Behat tests. And so if you're familiar with Circle CI or Travis, you can, what I've been doing is actually building my Drupal site on that continuous integration server and then running my tests against it. But now that this awesome PR is going to get merged in for the Drush driver, I'm just going to talk to a remote Drupal site, I think. So that's it. Anyone have any questions?
Have you ever been able to get Xdebug to work when you're editing or when you're trying to debug one of your feature? What's it called? A context? Like you write in your own. Is that a context? I can't remember the terminology.
Yeah. So if you're using a context class to create your own steps.
Yeah, and you're trying to debug that.
Yeah. So
that seems
yeah, that's difficult. What I usually do in that instance is just var dump to the terminal. Okay. But it depends on what's being executed. If you're trying to test something that is actually happening during a page, something that's happening in a browser, then it works out. Any other questions? Yeah.
So this touches on a little bit on that Selenium thing again. I noticed that you were including part of that during the installation. Mm-hmm. Without setting up the server. Is this just checking against what you've set up with the API, or is it actually checking, let's say I break something in the front end, mm-hmm. that makes it so, okay, I've made it now so that, yeah, you can't actually successfully edit the post, but it's not permissions, it's not rejecting it. But is it going to catch something like that, or is it a little bit more narrowly scoped testing?
It depends on how you write the test, right? Because you can write it Like for instance, like you saw me do where I said now, and I go to this URL, then I should see a 403. Like that's actually emulating that in a browser.
Is it a fully rendered thing? If I accidentally hide a password field, is that going to make a login test fail in CSS, let's say?
I think that you're going to need the Selenium driver for that.
Okay.
Yeah.
What if I accidentally delete the password field from my template? So
That
it's
will
in
fail.
HTML.
That will fail.
Okay.
Yes. Yep. Yeah.
Other Selenium questions. So, for someone starting in writing Behat tests, is there a way to at least use, let's say, a Selenium script as a starting point and translate to a Behat test? You know, going through, I'm thinking like a QA person is going through and recording their sequence of what they're doing, something more complicated, and then translate that script back into a series of tests.
I'm not familiar with a way to do that.
Okay.
Yeah,
Curious.
yeah. I think you'd have to kind of watch it and then write the steps. Yeah. Any other questions?
In Behat 3, I was trying to symlink to features outside of the feature path.
Okay.
And you could point to a name in the scenario, but you couldn't use the name flag, but it actually wouldn't run it as a file.
Really?
Yeah. Have you ever run into that?
No, I've never tried to do that, so I'm not familiar with that. But you can have within your features directory, you can break it up. You can split it up into as many directories as you need. That may not have met your
Yeah, and I was
use
trying
case,
to,
but-
from the root, have shared directories. So in each different directory, you could run to the root.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, I haven't run into that.
It's kind of a process question, more about going from your features and scenarios to your issue tracker or whatever, so that your developers can actually
Absolutely.
track in a way like that. Do you have any experience with that? Or?
Yeah. So I think that as you saw, there's user stories in each feature, and it maps really great to like Jira or whatever you're using, and I think that in my experience, it's probably going a little bit overboard to take every story and turn it into a Behat feature, because projects have limitations like timeline and budget. But identifying high value features and making sure that those are tested is really important, and it does translate super well. So yeah.
Can you comment on using Behat for load testing and how you interact with caching or waiting those things?
Yeah.
So I've recently run some spiders, and if I don't break the cache in the URL that I'm asking for, it basically serves up old content.
Yeah. I think that that's a good question. You probably have to write some custom steps for that. Yeah, that it's really extendable. So
Yeah, it might be a great way to prime a cache. I don't know about breaking one, but you could use it to prime page caches and garnish.
A couple of questions. One, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about writing failing tests, and if you typically start with failing tests, and so you don't get false positives. And also, if you could talk a little bit about, on a typical project, how long does your test suite take to run? How often do you run it?
yeah, absolutely. So writing failing tests, that's awesome. I think that typically what my workflow has been is I write a passing test and then I break it. But kind of the same concept. But you have to make sure that the test is working correctly and that it's not a false positive, like you said. And then it definitely varies widely how long a test suite takes to run. We had a conversation about this last night, and you pointed out that you can use tag exclusion and stuff to only run certain features and scenarios. And so I think if you're only concerned with testing a subset of your functionality, that can speed things up. You don't have to run the whole suite. But in projects that I've been on where we definitely weren't testing like every user story that represented functionality, but high value functionality, that the actual Behat script it's been taking like, I don't know, a couple minutes the most. But it could definitely take a lot longer than that if you have a pretty extensive feature set that you're testing.
It's probably been asked already, but if you had dynamically generated forms, such as my killer forms, and you wanted to test validation, what we need to use Selenium?
Yeah, so dynamically generated as in JavaScript on like client-side JavaScript. Yeah, you'd use Selenium, and that would work.
With Behat?
Yeah, absolutely.
What do you do about cleanup in terms of the users it creates, the nodes it creates? Does it clean up automatically?
Yeah, so the Drupal extension is awesome. It handles all of that for you. But it'll get you if you do custom stuff, if you write your own tests. Like that's why it was super important when I was writing my custom feature, or writing my custom steps in my context, that I tracked when I changed a configuration variable and set it back. Because yeah, that's super important. You have to set your state back.
But it'll clean up nodes and users and stuff like that.
If you're using the Drupal extension and the Drupal driver, which if you follow these steps you are, then yeah, when it creates nodes and users, the out-of-the-box steps that we saw, all of those clean up after themselves. Now, if you stop the execution of a Behat script while it's going, if you like Control-C it, that's not going to be cleaned up, and that's led to some confusion in the past where you're like, why is this failing now? And it's because your state is muddied. So, any other questions? Yeah.
What about taking a screenshot and then having the Behat compare a screenshot if it's some sort of visual?
Yeah, absolutely. There are ways to do that in Behat. I'm not familiar with them, but I know people who've set that up, and it's awesome. You can absolutely. Mm-hmm.
And it was a really good tool. There was a session at the DrupalCon in LA back in April that goes through all those tests, writing that test and how to set it up, and did a really nice job of doing it side by side. Just for example, breaking an H1 style, you see right away, and that's what the custom patch.
Cool. Any other questions? Awesome. I do want to show, forgot to do this earlier, want to show in real life the tests running and show like the browser window opening up, because it's really cool. So here it's breaking at the breakpoint that I set up, and it's going to wait until I hit return to continue. It prints it out, shows me the window in Firefox. And then when I close this window out, it continues with the rest of the features.
Is it actually outputting the HTML itself, or is it just taking you to the page on your local site?
It's outputting the HTML from the last response. It saves it to a file.
It's pretty sexy.
All right.
Awesome.
Thank you. Yeah, absolutely.